Greetings all, Ferrari-Man 601 here. Welcome back to another 1/400 scale die-cast model aircraft review of this from NG, Next Generation Models, the Boeing 747SP, seen here in American Airlines colors. We have taken a look at the 1/400 SP from NG before, some months ago now on the channel, but I did want to take another look at the SP simply because of this model here. This is one of those models that I've been looking for quite some time. I really love the bare metal liveries that airlines used to run. They don't really do this anymore nowadays for reasons that we will get into in due course, but American Airlines through the 70s and 80s, and I even remember this going up into the early 2000s, they ran these chrome liveries and they looked absolutely tremendous. They were just so good, highly reflective. They caught the sun glint very nicely, and at least in the time that I've been alive, I always associated this look with American Airlines, and even from a long way out in the distance, looking at an airplane flying overhead, you could instantly recognize that livery as, that's American Airlines. So this is a model that I've wanted for quite some time. MG released this one quite recently to us, and now we've got it, and now we're going to be taking a look at it because, well, two things. I love the 747SP because it's just such a quirky, offbeat sort of airplane, and that livery, it's really, really cool. And of course, NG, they're making the best 747SP molds on the market today, and I think they're basically the only manufacturer that's actively making SPs at the present time. So it was an instant buy for me, and you'll see why. This is an absolutely fantastic model. Let's take a look at the 747SP in 1/400 scale by NG.
Before we take a closer look at this model, let's take a look at the box in which it comes. Coming in here from screen right, there we go. There is the NG Boeing 747SP box. Pretty typical NG box. What we lack in terms of information about the aircraft, we kind of regain in terms of the box art. Have a look at this. It's absolutely great. Obviously, it's done up in the American Airlines colors there. We have got the bare aluminum silver. We have got a little negative image there of the American Airlines logo behind the rendering of the aircraft, which is about the same size as the model itself. Boeing 747SP up there in the top left. Obviously, the aircraft, 747 luxury liner, which was how American was branding their 747s at the time. American Airlines logo there, and then the registration, November 601 Alpha Alpha. Boeing officially licensed product and all of that legalese down there. NG Next Generation Model 1/400 scale collectible models die-cast metal. Bottom panel looks a bit like this, another smaller rendering of the aircraft, basically a copy-paste of the cover art there with the registration reiterated, and then 747SP NG logo down there. Right side panel, basically another recapitulation of the cover there. 747SP, NG, American Airlines, and then of course we have got our nomenclature down there, the selling points if you will. Top panel the same as the bottom, as you can see, and then the left panel, American Airlines, 747SP, you get the picture of all of that. The reverse of the box is basically the same as the front panel. We don't have the Boeing 747SP branding there. In its place, we have the NG logo, rendering of the aircraft as we had on the front, 747 luxury liner, and then, of course, the social media links there, as well as the corporate website for NG models. There's your Boeing licensing. Item number, for those of you keeping score, is 07007, and then you get your disclaimers for choking hazards and all sorts of things, not for children under 14 years old. Right there. I don't know why I almost said 18. But yeah, that's the box. Very typical, pretty standard NG box here. Nothing really special about it, but I do like the cover art that they gave us there, and I do appreciate how NG does that. They try to reiterate the livery colors of whatever the subject matter is, and it has a nice effect. But unlike, say, the Gemini Jets boxes, it doesn't give you any information whatsoever about the aircraft, which is a little bit of a detractor. However, we can solve that problem ourselves. As we have already taken a look at the 747SP prior, I don't want to dive quite as deeply into the specifications or history of the aircraft this time around, but The important parts are it is a Boeing 747, but it is a shortened and lighter variant of the 747-100. Basically what happened in the late 1960s, early 1970s when they started to introduce the 747 for commercial service, it was obviously the largest aircraft full stop built to that point. It was the largest airliner there being, and it gave a lot of extra capacity in terms of cargo and passenger seats to the airlines. However, certain airlines wanted to run certain routes that were very long distance, even outside the already very long range of the 747-100. So one of those airlines, Pan Am, went to Boeing and said, hey, we want something that can go a little bit farther, and we're not entirely worried about passenger capacity, but we really like the 747 platform. Our pilots like it. We don't want to really invest in retraining our pilots to fly a completely different airplane, so what can you do to us? Boeing said, all right, we'll take the 747 and we'll make it a tri-jet. Because, well, the DC-10 and the L-1011 from McDonnell and Lockheed were also coming to the fore, and they were offering an extended range. Boeing tried a tri-jet for the 747. It never really got away from a design study. They said, this isn't going to work, but the shortened fuselage will. So we have a 4-engine quad-jet wing-mounted, below-wing mounted engines on a shortened 747 fuselage, and that is the SP. The 747 SP, the SP in the name means special performance, and it's a longer range but lower capacity variant of the 747-100. It first flew on July 4th, 1975, and it went into commercial service with Pan Am in 1976. 45 of these in total were built. They were not great sellers, but they were absolutely great performers. Very famously, Pan Am did a couple round-the-world cruises, if you will, with their 747 SP, some of which actually got some pretty substantial media attention, and they did exactly what they were advertised to do. For the trade-off of having fewer seats, you got longer range, and the airlines would use the SP on their long-range point-to-point routes like your LA to Tokyo, things like that. Things where you've got to cross the Pacific, generally speaking, as that is the largest continuous span of water anywhere on the planet. So all of your flights from the west coast of the Americas out to Oceania and out to East Asia, you would see the SPs running those routes, and of course you would see them going transatlantic and what have you as well. But really, that's what they were designed to do. They were designed for point-to-point long-haul service, and that's what they did. The SPs are still flying today. 45 were produced. However, only a handful of them are still flying today. Pan Am was a huge user of them. South African Airways was as well, Iran Air, China Airlines, and the Royal Flight of Oman. However, out of all of those, only the Royal Flight of Oman still flies their 747 SPs. There is a couple other privately owned airframes that are still in service. The Las Vegas Sands Corporation, we took a look at that aircraft in 1400 some months ago. They still have one of their 747 SPs. They unfortunately lost another one of theirs in a hangar accident in late 2020. So they've got one left. They previously had two that were in flight order. And there is one additional aircraft flying with NASA as the platform for their SOFIA stratospheric-based observatory. That is a telescope mounted in the back of a 747 SP, and that one is still flying all around the world in service for NASA. Specifications in general, though, on the SP, they are as follows. We've got a cockpit crew of 3. We have 2 pilots and we have 1 navigator/flight engineer. And the 747 SPs that are still flying still have cockpit crews of 3. They've not been retrofitted with more sophisticated avionics to obviate the need, at least not entirely, for that flight engineer's position. Exit limit on the aircraft is 400, so again, you've got exit limits in excess of 500 on most other variants of the 747, so that illustrates how much smaller this one is in terms of capacity. The dimensions also illustrate how much smaller this airplane is in comparison to its larger stablemates. We have an overall length of 184 feet 9 inches, that's 56.31 meters. The wingspan is 195 feet 8 inches, that's 59.64 meters. Overall wing area is 5,500 square feet, or 511 square meters. Overall height is 65 feet 10 inches, or 20.07 meters, and that's taller than the standard variants of the 747 on account of the larger vertical stabilizer on the SP, and that is in place for two reasons. One, it's partially there because this was supposed to be a tri-jet to begin with, and they needed the extra space to mount that third engine in the tail. However, the larger vertical stabilizer had to remain because shortening the fuselage length meant that the moment arm for yaw and the yaw axis was different from the standard aircraft, which meant that you needed more of a deflection surface in the rudder to control the yaw, so the larger vertical stabilizer was necessitated by that. The operating empty weight on the aircraft, that could range from anywhere from 325,260 pounds to 336,870 pounds. That's a range of 147,540 to 152,800 kilograms. Maximum takeoff weight was 696,000 pounds. That's 315,700 kilograms. Maximum landing weight, 450,000 pounds. That's 204,100 kilograms. The engines on this aircraft, obviously there are four of them, and there were two options to choose from. There were the Pratt & Whitney JT9D-7s, and then they go through the sub-prefixes of A, H, F, FW, and J, or the Rolls-Royce RB211 engines. They were the RB211-524s, and then the B2, C2, and D4 variants thereof. This aircraft, I believe, has the Pratt & Whitney engines fitted to it. Engine thrust from the Pratt & Whitney engines ranged from 46,950 to 50,000 pound-feet at sea level. That is 208,000.8 newtons to 224,000.4 kilonewtons. The Rolls-Royce engines slightly uprated relative to the Pratt & Whitney's, but negligible all things considered. 49,150 pound-feet to 51,980 pound-feet at sea level. That's 219 to 231,000 newtons there. Maximum speed of the aircraft was Mach 0.92. That's 542 knots or 1,004 kilometers per hour. Cruising speed, however, slightly reduced from that, Mach 0.86, 493 knots or 914 kilometers per hour. Service ceiling, higher than the standard 747 on account of the lighter weight, I would presume. 45,100 feet, that's 13,700 meters. So the high service ceiling there obviously makes this aircraft an excellent choice for the Sophia Observatory. Maximum range, and this was really the calling card of the SP back in its day, 6,650 nautical miles, that's 12,320 kilometers or 7,650 statute miles. Fuel capacity was 50,360 US gallons, that's 190,630 liters. So we've got a smaller, a shorter, and a lighter 747, but again, at the expense of passenger or cargo capacity, you get a greatly extended range, and that is exactly what the aircraft was designed for, and it did it pretty well. With the aircraft rotating once again, we actually have some more information about this particular airframe. According to 747SP.com, I'll link to this in my description, apparently this is a website that will show you all the information available for any 747SP airframe ever built. This particular one here that we see here modeled, November 601 Alpha Alpha, this one was airframe 21962 evidently, and as far as I can tell it would have been built in 1977 and 1978 over there at the Boeing plant. We first see it here logged on the website in TWA colors, believe it or not. American Airlines was not the first operator of this particular airframe. TWA evidently placed this order on October 17th, 1978. So whether or not the aircraft was first started being built then, in terms of a groundbreaking on the aircraft, was on that date, it's unclear, but that's when the order was placed for it, and the aircraft was rolled out on February 19th, 1980. So we could assume that this aircraft was, if not completely on the drawing board, it was basically built between October of 1978 and February of 1980. That makes some sense to me, about a year and a half construction time overall. We see the airframe first flying on March 12th, 1980, registered as November 57202 in TWA colors, and it was delivered to TWA on March 21st of 1980, bearing that same registration. It was observed a few times in 1980 through 1982. The aircraft apparently had a small incident at San Francisco on January 28th, 1982. Again with TWA, there was an issue with a tug, apparently for taxi pushback. But other than that, not seeing anything at all. The aircraft was last seen in TWA colors on January 8th, 1983, evidently. The aircraft's history with American Airlines begins on July 17th, 1986. Initially, it flew with American in its November 57202 registration there, obviously in American colors. However, the registration is being noted on February 1st, 1987 as November 601 Alpha Alpha. So the aircraft, as we see it here, came into existence by the 1st of February, 1987. The aircraft then remains in this configuration, in this livery, with this registration for a number of years. We see it here last in American Airlines colors on February 22nd, 1993, where it was ferried for storage, and then it continues to be exchanged through a few different owners through 1993. We last see it in the November 601 Alpha Alpha registration on May 25th, 1993. It has no titles after that. The aircraft is then operated by the government of Kazakhstan for a number of years through 1993 and 1994. We last see it in the Kazakh colors there in 1995 on July 16th. The aircraft is then brought to Air France for a time, it appears, not re-liveried and not re-registered. Through its time in Kazakhstan, it's registered as Uniform November 001. After that, 1996, it returns to Kazakhstan, and then we don't see it really again until 1997. We see a registration change, still owned by Kazakhstan though, now registered as Papa 4 Alpha Foxtrot Echo, continues through 1997 and 1998, owned by Iceland for a time in 1997. So this aircraft has gone all over the world, figuratively and literally. 1998, a registration change yet again. Tango Foxtrot Alpha Bravo November. This thing absolutely saw it all. To make a long story short, by the time we get it to 2002, we see it registered as Papa 4 Alpha Foxtrot Echo, but it is now owned by Cargolux, and it is being scrapped. The last day that this aircraft was apparently intact and theoretically flyable was March 1st, 2002, seen in Luxembourg in the custodianship of Cargolux, and then they begin to scrap it. We show the cockpit and upper fuselage removed by June 2002, and ultimately the last note that we have here is from September 24th, 2010, with the upper deck and cockpit removed. However, they are being maintained elsewhere for training use. Cargolux probably has contracts with other passenger airlines out there for cockpit training and cabin crew training, things like that. So this aircraft has been broken up, and it has been broken up since 2002, but evidently, at least as of 11 years ago, sections of it still existed and were still used to train next generations of air crews, and I believe the cockpit has been incorporated into a motion-based simulator someplace, again, most likely for pilot training nowadays. So this aircraft is no longer with us specifically, but its legacy does continue to live on. I thought that was interesting. I was able to find information about this particular airframe. What of this model then? Well, we took a look at an SP in 1/400th scale last year in 2020, and that one also was by NG, but it was in the colors of the Las Vegas Sands Corporation. That was VPBLK, and that one is still in existence. Its sister ship, BMS, was lost in that hangar incident that we mentioned. It collided with another airplane in a maintenance hangar, and it just cut a big old gouge below the nose, and it was terminal, quite obviously. I believe that airplane is being broken up, if it's not been broken up already. However, this one, not with us any longer, but this model is very, very good. I wanted to get this model specifically because of this livery. I love the old American Airlines livery with the extensive use of bare aluminum there, giving this chrome look. And really, that was the only reason I wanted it, other than, well, it's a 747 SP, and I happen to really love this aircraft. So Here it is. This is, I believe, it was a March 2021 release. It was March or April 2021 release from NG. However, this particular one was late shipping, and I don't entirely know why. I know that NG had some trouble with their SP paint on their Iran Air liveried SPs lately, and I don't know if this production run was also affected by that. There were some paint defects that led to paint cracking and chipping and flaking off, so they probably took some time to hash all of that out. I don't have any of the Iran Air or South African liveried SP models, but they are available, and this one was made available around the same time. The Pan Am livery SP that NG made also became available at around the same time. I also did get one of those, and I got that one a few weeks earlier than this one. So I don't know what the delay was, but it was worth the wait. Have a look at what they did here with that paint, or lack thereof, I've got to say. I do have to give one disclaimer. I did polish the aircraft after I received it and before shooting this video, because I just wanted to accentuate just how shiny this is. It looked absolutely fine straight out of the box, but it's been my experience with these models, whether you get them from NG or any of the other manufacturers, it's been my experience that they come a little bit rough in terms of their cleanliness. Sometimes they've got machine oil on them, which I'm sure is an artifact of the manufacturing process. Other times they have got, it almost looks like graphite on them. I don't know if some of the machinery that's used in the factories is lubricated by graphite, or if they use graphite to stick the wings into the fuselage as a lubricant. But whatever it might be, sometimes they come a little bit dirty, and that was the case with this one. It looked fine, but I wanted it to look a little bit better, so I did go over this, and I polished it and wiped it down first of all with some water and then polished it up. And it looks absolutely fine. You'll notice the highly reflective upper portion of the fuselage there, and you can see it through the tail cone on the lower side as well. It looks absolutely fantastic, and it also means that it will just pick up and scatter whatever colors of the room you have. So you'll be seeing some red hues in here because I'm in a distinctly red room, but that's all reflective. It's a very nice silvery finish. It's not totally smooth. There are some very shallow burrs in the metal in some places, and I don't want to say that that's a problem, only because if you've ever taken a close-up look at the skin of most aircraft, you'll see that they are actually quite far from totally smooth. Obviously there are rivet lines and there are seam lines between panels, and obviously cutouts for doors and things like that. They don't need to be totally smooth, therefore they're not, and that's the case with the model as well. I think it adds a little bit of character, and it's not to say that it's rough to the touch either. When we take a closer look at things, you'll see how the reflections are cast back, and you might even be able to see some of it now. Just a very shallow scoring, and even some of the grain in the metal is visible, and I like all of that. It gives it character, first of all, and it also just harkens back to what the thing actually is. It's a lump of zinc. So I like that, and it's a nice effect, even though it's not necessarily correct in terms of the patterning you would see on the surface of an airplane skin, but I do like that. Aside from the paint or lack thereof, depending on what we're looking at, the rest of the airplane is absolutely wonderful, typical, standard NG fare. We've got great use of the tampo printing in the areas, particularly in the areas where there is no paint. That whole upper section of the fuselage, the tampo printing there, very nice. Typically, you don't see too many models doing the tampo printing directly onto untreated metal, but that's the case here, and it's working quite nicely. There's no smudging, no streaking, no doubling or overprint anywhere. It's all very crisp and clean, and I really do like it a lot. The American title graphics there, they're very nice. Obviously, there's a little bit of interplay with the very highly reflective surface that they're on, but everything is nicely legible, and any readability issues are just coming from the nature of the substrate rather than the printing, so that's good. Obviously, we have got the tricolor red, white, and blue cheat line going from the lower to the upper section of the cheat line. That's very crisp and clean. I like the roughly rhomboid patterning of it at its, at least at the trailing edge. At the leading edge of it, there really is no leading edge because the cheat lines both converge at the radome there at the tip of the nose. And they come together perfectly straight, no problems in that whatsoever. 747 luxury liner, subtitle graphics also visible there below the first class cabin area. Beautiful. tail cone with the auxiliary power unit exhaust and the empennage looking absolutely wonderful. The vertical stabilizer there as well with the shut lines for the rudder control surfaces looking excellent. The wings, they are identical basically to what we saw on the Las Vegas Sands SP. They look wonderful here as they did there. And then our engine nacelles here on the starboard wing, they're looking great. Nice bypass duct visible in all four engine nacelles. The exhaust cone area of the engines look great. Pylons look great. Everything looks absolutely great. Landing gear and the landing gear doors, those are rubber tires. The landing gear, they do all roll very freely. However, the landing gear do not pivot. So there's no tilt ability on the main gear. You don't generally get that on NG models at all, it's been my experience. Gemini Jets models, they tend to tilt on the airplanes that do have tilting landing gear, at least on the mains. But the NGs don't do that, but they give you very, very, very good landing gear in exchange for getting rid of that one feature. So I like that. And how often are you really going to be displaying this thing on its wheels, but pitched up? Basically never. So I like that a lot. The only thing I will say is that the port side horizontal stabilizer is a little bit loose. It came off actually as I was polishing the model, and it actually helped me polish the aft section of the fuselage, but it is loose. It obviously went back into place with no problem. You know how these things work. They just have the tabs that go into the slots, and they are press fit basically, and I believe at the factory they do it at a temperature gradient. So they heat up the fuselage and they stick the tab in there that is holding that stabilizer, the little winglet there, and then as it contracts it locks it in. Obviously that didn't quite go so well and it's a little bit loose, but I'm not going to take off points for that because it's far from the only model I've had that has, well, as a bonus feature, if you will, has removable wings or anything else, but I like all of that. Your vertical stabilizer, as we alluded to, here it is in full frame. Very nice. It just has that sort of silver paint here. That is not bare aluminum. That is just the silver or whitish paint. Call it an off-white with the American Airlines logo and then the U.S. flag there shown on both sides. On the port side, it'll be in a more traditional orientation. There we go. Like all of that, looks good. Obviously, you can see the blisters for the hinge joints for the rudder control surface, and they all look very nice. And then, of course, the top side there of the fuselage where we do have our dorsal antenna. Just one of them here. Remember, this is an airplane from the 70s, so no Wi-Fi yet, but I like all of that immensely. And then below on the underside of the aircraft, we have a few ventral antennas. We've got a tail one here, and then we have got another one moving forward. Yep, you can just see that there, just aft of the nose gear. Very, very, very nice all around. Obviously, you've got the landing gear doors and the struts and everything. Looks marvelous, and I waited a while for this one. This one was announced, I believe, at the end of 2020. I want to say even in November 2020. I'm not entirely sure on that, but I ordered it the instant I saw NG post it on their Instagram page that they were going to be making an American liveried SP, and I liked the LV Sands aircraft that I already showed you so much that I had absolutely no reservations about getting another SP by NG, and it has not at all been a disappointment whatsoever. We'll stop the rotation and we'll sort of go into sub-miniature presentation here of what we do have on the airplane. First of all, the nose section, it's absolutely wonderful. I really think having the unfinished bare metal in the upper section of the fuselage really sets this thing off, and it's fantastic. I currently have no other model that is in this livery or has an extensive amount of unpainted metal on it, so it's a really cool effect and I like it immensely. But as we can see here, obviously we have got the traditional and legendary iconic hump of the 747, and this being the smallest 747 ever doesn't really affect the hump at all. So still the same shape that we saw on the 100 and 200. When we get into the 300, they start to change the shape a little bit, but here it is the classic proportion and it looks absolutely marvelous. Nose section is very prim and proper and crisp, no problems with any of the window printing. The cheat line is laser straight all across from stem to stern. We have got our L1 and L2 doors visible here, and then of course we also have our upper deck door, which on the SP I don't know if they serviced that with a jetway or if you had to just climb up there once you boarded through the L1 or L2 door, wherever the jetway was connected. But you can see that upper level door there. Additionally, above that and slightly more forward, you can see the emergency escape hatch from the cockpit just above and arrears of the cockpit windows proper. So there we go. We've got two left side windows and then obviously our two forward main windows there. We have got windscreen wipers below them and they look great. And then of course we have got the white radar dome there on over the nose tip. So looks great. 747 luxury liner graphics below the cheat line, looking wonderful. Slightly aft of that and just ahead of the wing root, you can see that we have got some static ports or air data ports. Not entirely sure which ones they are, but they're visible and they look the part. They're not totally detailed, but at that scale, I don't think you could really fault them too much. They're there. That looks fantastic in and of itself. And below that, and just aft of the nose gear doors, you can see that we have got our ventral antenna or our forward ventral antenna because there is an aft one as well. But looking great. Nose gear itself, you can see the strut there and the suspension looks great, and the tires there. Those are plastic wheels wrapped in rubber tires. They are actual rubber. They roll wonderfully, and obviously they support the aircraft nicely. So it's wonderful. No qualms about it at all. Shifting our view a little bit, and we can head a little bit farther aft from the nose section. First of all, I do want to point out, though, you can see here in the reflections, you can see some of the surface characteristics of the metal right through there. You can just see how that light is being scattered through some of the uneven surfaces in the metal. That's just what it is. If you really wanted to buff that out and make sure that you had a truly uniform surface, we'd be looking at a production cost that would be in the hundreds of dollars at that point, because remember, this is 1/400th scale and the camera is doing a great job of magnifying the overall visual space that this thing is taking up. So we're talking about very tiny tolerances already. If you really wanted to get that flat, then we're talking about almost aerospace grade stuff, and well, we're not really in that sort of market. But I'd be interested to see what a skilled machinist could do with something like this. But anyway, moving aft of the hump section, you can see our dorsal antenna up top, on the top of the hump, American title graphics, and then we get into the wing root area. Looks good. The wings are mounted into the fuselage itself. You can see the little blister there in the wing, right there where it mounts up with the fuselage. That is part of the fuselage mold that is actually not structural to the wings. So very nice. Speaking of the wings, wing leading edge, you can see the two landing lights right there. Very nice. And then we have got our port engines here. Wonderfully done. The pylons are nice and they're scale correct. The engine nacelles and the pylons are done in plastic. The rest of it, though, is all die cast and plastic or metal. It looks good nonetheless. Not a whole lot of detail to see on the nacelles. I can't readily see any ground service ports apart from perhaps these two very small silver rectangular sections there on either one of the nacelles. But other than that, that's basically all we have got. We do have a little bit of an auxiliary duct out the sides of the engines, the black rectangular sections you can see, but they look good nonetheless, and the engines did very much look like that in this time. It's only in more recent years with the higher bypass engines where we've got the bigger nacelles and they put more things on the outside of them. No fins or anything like that in this era by and large. Rest of the leading edge of the wing moving outboard, you can see the red strobe there on the port wing tip, and we do have the antennas there on the wing tips as well that extend aft a little bit from the actual wing tip. That looks good. And then our main landing gear, as you can see, more plastic wheels and rubber tires. They look marvelous and they roll very nicely, although they do not pivot as we previously mentioned. Moving aft into the tail cone, first of all, you can see the ventral antenna aft, and then as we move up, you can see the empennage there with our vertical and horizontal stabilizers and our American Airlines graphics there on the tail. Looks marvelous, no problems there. The US flag does not have 50 stars on it. You can probably pause this and see how many stars there are on there. And I don't know, perhaps I'll link in a high resolution shot that I did take of the tail, and we'll take a look at how many stars are actually on there. But yeah, it's crisply printed, but obviously the scale constraints mean that the flag looks like it's got at least one too many stripes, and it does not have 50 stars, but I think I can excuse that. Looks good. Through the tail cone itself, you can see we've got our service hatch for the auxiliary power unit now to just at the rear of the tail cone, and there is an APU exhaust that's more visible from the rear, and it is a separate piece of hardware. It's not just paint there. It is actually modeled separately, and that's a very nice touch, and it shows great attention to detail on the part of NG. Take a look from nose on here at the SP. Have a look here. Marvelous proportion there. I love that fuselage shape as it interplays with the wing root shape and the two engines here, the two inboard engines flanking everything. Looks so good. Obviously here you can see that its attitude on the ground is pretty much laser straight. I've got no complaints about the landing gear heights or anything with crooked struts. Looks great. And then of course going into the upper section of the fuselage above the cheat line where we can see the cockpit windows now more clearly. Looks absolutely marvelous. It's a little bit difficult to see at times the cockpit windows with the reflections the way that they are, but it looks good, and again, it looks like a 747 SP. All the printing is crisp there as well, and again, it is a little bit difficult just with the contrast, but it looks good, and I've got no complaints. Landing lights there on the leading edges of the wings, visible there, two on each side. And then moving outboard here on the starboard wing with our engines, you can see we've got decent fan blade detail on the engines. They're not passed through visually, so there's no visible bypass duct, but it's implied, and it works pretty well. But I do like the fan blade details that NG are doing here on these, I assume, Pratt & Whitney engines on these SPs. They look really, really good. They're crisp, they're static, they do not turn or anything like that, but they look good enough. And then, of course, out to the wingtip with our green strobe for the starboard wing. Looks good. You can also see the disposition of the empennage here, at least the horizontal stabilizers. And despite the port side one being a bit loose, it does look pretty straight to me. Perhaps it's drooping a little bit, but not really enough to notice unless you're going to be really, really critical in your analysis. And I don't have any real complaints about any of that. It looks wonderful. Taking a look at the port side, we'll zoom in here to the nose. Basically very similar to the starboard side, but a couple of differences. The main one being that you can see that we have a forward cargo hatch right about there. So that looks very, very nice, and you can see some of the fastener detailing there with some of the bigger bolts and rivets that are holding that wing root in place there, the wing spar area. That looks good. And of course the shut lines for that cargo hatch. Looking good. 747 luxury liner subtitle graphics there, visible again below the first class cabin. American title graphics, as always, above the cheat line. I really like the contrast of the windows in that blue section of the cheat line. Looks good. And additionally, you can see our registration there in blue against the chrome, which is really difficult to make out, but it is there, and it is printed nicely. That, again, is November 601 Alpha Alpha. Also, my channel name, I should mention, is FerrariBad 601, and I didn't actually know the registration of this model before I got it. So when I got it out of its shipping box and saw the registration, oh, that's a nice fit, but completely unintentional. We'll call that serendipity. Anyway, starboard wing, as you can see. Again, we have got our starboard engines here, basically mirroring the port engines, as they well should, but they look very nice. Green strobe on the starboard wing with the antenna, and then into the tail cone. We've got a rear cargo door visible right about there. Yep, there we go. Rear cargo door with its shut line and its hardware, and then the L3 and L4 doors here moving aft. Auxiliary power unit inside the tail cone with the service hatch. Empennage here on the starboard side, vertical stabilizer, mirror image of the port side. However, here, just because the lighting is falling a little bit differently, you can see that we have got our leading edge here in unpainted metal there. Just showing you that. the way it's picking up the reflection there of some of the red walls in here. That looks very, very nice, giving it a bit of a golden color from this perspective. Looks good. Also, you can see that we do have the shut lines for the rudder control surfaces and the blisters there. Looks like we have got two of them. We've got sort of a mid-level, pretty much level with the eagle there and the American Airlines logo, and then we got one just above the U.S. flag. Very nice all around. And again, I do have to say though, as you're watching this video, especially when the aircraft is rotating, just take a look at what the reflections do in the bare metal areas on the airplane, because they will just pick up and throw back the colors of whatever environment it's in. Sometimes it can look almost pure white if you've got a bright enough light source, and other times it will just pick up whatever color the room is. So it's very nice. There are no two times that this model ever looks exactly the same. So it has that sort of, I guess, value as well, because depending on how you display it, it's going to look different. It's just a creature of its environment, and I like that. And I really do wish that more airlines would go back to having these unpainted liveries, but these were maintenance nightmares. If I decided to polish this thing before I shot it for the review, imagine how difficult it is to keep this thing clean when it's an actual airplane and it's flying all around the world in whatever kinds of weather, and it's getting hit with stones and sand and birds and whatever they happen to run into. This thing is going to be a bear to maintain, and from everything I've read about the airlines that did fly these unpainted liveries in the past, the reason why they no longer do is there are some reasons, multiple reasons why, but the big reason is the maintenance on them. It's not because the bare metal corrodes. I mean, aluminum is fairly corrosion resistant as it is, particularly the alloys used in aviation, but it's just so difficult to keep clean, because after every flight, basically, you've got to have, for an airplane this size, probably have a dedicated staff of 10 to 20 people go up on scaffolding or mobile cranes or whatever and just wash the thing down at bare minimum, if not wax it. So that's why they no longer fly these unpainted liveries. It's a shame, because I don't think most of the new liveries look nearly as striking as this one does, but I do understand why they stopped doing it, because just caring for a model like this, it's a little bit labor intensive, never mind the real thing. And now from the rear of the SP, we'll just zoom in here. I want to show the tail cone with the auxiliary power unit exhaust, and you can see that there, basically dead center of frame. You can see that there actually is a different component there, a bit of hardware mounted where the auxiliary power unit exhaust is. It is not just silver paint, although it is obviously colored silver. There is a pipe there modeled, and I appreciate the attention to detail. And that's been the case for all of the larger wide-body jets that we've taken a look at, where there is an auxiliary power unit mounted there. They do bother to model that as a separate piece of physical hardware, so I do appreciate that quite a lot. Otherwise, you can see the lower section of the tail cone also in the unpainted aluminum, as is the upper section of the fuselage, and very highly reflective therefore. We also have got our main landing gear here, front and center, and again, they do all look straight. They support the aircraft nicely, and the airplane takes up pretty much a straight and level attitude sitting on the ground. Moving outboard on the port wing with our engines there, the exhaust sides of the engines now. There's no real detail inside the engines there. Obviously, you have got the exhaust cone area, which does taper to a rather sharp point at the exhaust, so there would be no void to see in there. But where there would be a void in the bypass duct, it's just pure black in there because, well, it's all closed from the perspective of it being a model. Those fan blades do cover the entire inlet of the nacelle, as they would not do in reality. At least there would be pass-through between the blades, but not visible there simply because these engines are small. They're about 5 millimeters in diameter, so you can excuse that. Trailing edge of the wings there with our flaps and slats and spoilers for the shut lines anyway, for all of that hardware. That all looks fine. And the trailing edge of the starboard wing looks about the same. Very sharp edges back here, but they look very nice. You can also see, not so much on these older airplanes, but some of the nacelles for the flap actuation hardware that you get on the newer airplanes in particular, but you can see two little blisters below each wing here on this SP. Looks very, very, very good. And also a note about the flaps on the SP, and I did mention this in the other review as well, I believe, but different flaps on the SP because the wing shape is different on the SP than it is on the, in this case, the 747-100. But I believe these are single or double slat flaps. I know that these are simplified flaps relative to the standard 747-100 that this aircraft was derived from. Again, because the smaller wing meant that you don't need as much lift control devices here because the aerodynamics are different. But nonetheless, looking good here, and they took the time to model everything very nicely from all vantage points. And now, just to close this out, to take it up freehand and get a little bit closer up to some of the details that we've already seen, but perhaps give you a better look at some of them. There's the nose area with the cockpit windows. I think we can see them a bit more clearly now with the light falling just below them. But yes, you can see the integrity of the print is good, and you can even see that we've also got the washer bottle there, the little sprayers for the mist or the de-icing fluid, whatever they've got in there to help clear the windows from fog or from ice crystals, whatever they might encounter. That's all printed there as well, and it looks good. Obviously, the lower section of the nose there with the first class is usually the first class cabin on most 747s. Looks nice. The windows are rendered crisply, as is the shut line between the radar dome and the rest of the fuselage proper. Obviously, the radar dome, it's non-structural to the fuselage and it's not pressurized. So the pressure bulkhead is aft of that, and the radar dome is just a fairing to streamline that gap, and that looks nice. You can see the shut line there between the radar dome and the fuselage proper. It's covered by the cheat line, which comes together pretty much dead on from port to starboard. It looks fantastic. L1 door. There is an attempt at rendering text on the L1 and actually on all of the doors in terms of the operating instructions for emergency opening and how to lock and unlock. But obviously the scale constraints here mean that all of that is far too small to render in a legible fashion, but they attempt at the text. It's implied there, and it looks good. And there's similar detailing visible on the upper level door here, as well as on the emergency escape hatch. Over the top of the hump, you can see that we have got our beacon strobe light there modeled. Looks nice. And there is our dorsal antenna, the single dorsal antenna on this particular aircraft. And our upper deck windows as well. Looks very, very nice. We have got American there. Very cool. Good graphics, and you can see how crisp they are. Looking good. Upper surface of the port wing. There's our antenna there. And our engines. Leading edge slots here visible. The leading edge of the wing itself, of course, is all done in silver. Aft section of the fuselage, there's our L3 and L4 doors, looking good. There's our registration here visible, barely, very low contrast, but you can see it, looks good. And then the empennage area, vertical stabilizer with its unpainted, well, it would be unpainted in reality here, it's painted in silver, the same sort of silver paint you see on the upper surfaces of the wings here, but that looks good. Leading edge detail. And then, of course, the blisters for the actuation hardware for the rudder. And then our empennage here, horizontal stabilizers. They look nice. Very nice indeed. You can see the shut lines there for the elevators. And then the tail cone with the auxiliary power unit exhaust. Looking marvelous. You can also see the geometry of that aft fuselage leading into the tail cone, very different from the standard 747 because initially, again, they were going to have to accommodate an engine here in the tail, but then the larger vertical stabilizer remains and they have to accommodate that hardware, the hydraulic lines mostly, for actuating the rudder. Looks good. And it's, again, it's a different sort of curve than you get on the standard 747. But marvelous, absolutely marvelous. I've got absolutely nothing negative to say about this model. It all in all looks absolutely fantastic, and again, this was one that I wanted, and this one was really worth waiting for, I do have to say. Just look at that, it's glorious.
So there you have it, in 1/400 scale, the Boeing 747 SP by NG Next Generation Models. It's a fantastic airplane. What can I say? It's a fantastic example of a little bit of improvisation from one of the biggest aircraft manufacturers that the world has ever known. And it's a fantastic example of 1/400 scale craftsmanship by NG, who are very quickly distinguishing themselves as one of the best model manufacturers that we've seen in the model aircraft sector. It's absolutely great. Yes, you do have, on this particular example, you do have the loose port side horizontal stabilizer. But aside from that, I've got nothing that I can poke holes in this thing with at all. It's wonderfully done. It's exactly what it says on the package. It's the chrome livery, American Airlines 747. It doesn't get too much more classic Americana than that, does it? It's great. It very nicely complements the Las Vegas Sands SP that we took a look at some months ago. It has the same sort of build quality, and it's obviously the same mold by the same manufacturer. So I was so impressed by that one that I had no hesitancy whatever when it came to thinking about buying this one. As soon as I knew that they were going to make it, I got a pre-order in, and here it is. So it's a fantastic model, and I think that if you're looking for an SP, look at NG and then look no further, because they're making the absolute best SP mold that's on the market today, and these are all current production. This thing was made in 2021, so it's brand new. It's brand new to market, quite obviously, and I hope that these things sell well, because NG obviously put a lot of time and effort into designing the molds for these models, and they put a lot of effort into the liveries, and they researched the liveries as well, and they've even been crowdsourcing some of their research. If you take a look at their Instagram posts, they're not so active on other platforms, but if you take a look at Instagram, often they will be posting pictures of real-world aircraft that they're thinking of modeling, and they'll be asking us questions. Hey, do you know what this thing is on the livery? Is there any way that we could find better images of this? Do you know anything about it? And people will be answering questions, and ultimately some of those contributions are making it onto the models. So it's really, really fantastic to see this manufacturer really stepping up their game, and they're doing wonderful things, as you can see here, and now as we've seen twice with these SPs. They're great. And I've got to say that if you're looking for mid-century airliners, then you need one of these, particularly in this livery, or they've done the Pan Am livery as well, which looks fantastic. They've done the South Africa livery, which also looks fantastic. Or if you just want an SP in general, get the LV Sands aircraft. They're all fantastically done, and I can't recommend these any more highly than I already am. So, yes, NG in 1/400, the Boeing 747 SP, that is the state of the art right there. I absolutely love the thing. Until next time, though, I do hope that all of you have enjoyed this one for REMAN 601, saying thank you all very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.